A key tenet of Improv is yes and. If you're a Forester shopper, you are likely looking for a compact crossover with tons of space inside. You also want it to have all-wheel drive, so you and whatever you've loaded into the car can go wherever it is that you would like to go. And now you can do so with a hybrid powertrain, because this Subaru Forester is the first Subaru, not called Crosstrek, to get this new hybrid powertrain, which means you can now get all the benefits with very few, if any, significant takeaways. If you're looking for visual differences between the hybrid and non-hybrid models, you're actually going to notice more between the different trim levels than you are between those different powertrains. What we get is the updated front-end styling on all Foresters. Nothing here screaming out that this is the hybrid, which means we get the more boxy, upright, squared-out look that starts here and carries all the way through the back. And while I'm a pretty big fan of this overall front design, I've heard a lot of folks who think differently. So let me know down in the comments, do you prefer something a little bit maybe sleeker, or is this boxier Forester the way you'd like to go? Good news, no matter which one you get, you're gonna get a lot of standard features, especially in the hybrid, but we'll cover more of that later. Things like LED lighting, we have fog lights available here on this limited model, and because it's limited, it's not going to be quite as flashy or obvious to anyone who's passing by, so I like a little bit more subdued on the front end. In terms of overall dimension and side profile, it's essentially a copy-paste from the non-hybrid models, and I think that's going to be to everybody's benefit. If you want to start spotting some differences, the dead giveaway is going to be that hybrid badge you find here and out back. And if you want to be a little bit more in the know, there are a couple different wheel options for the hybrid trims that the counterpart non-hybrids don't get. One thing you won't be able to tell from the distance or even up close is going to be a difference in ground clearance, and that's because the hybrid model keeps all the same ground clearance, 8.7 inches, as we get in the full gasoline models. Around back, things remain very much vertical, but that's going to matter more when we open up the hatch rather than just taking a look at it. Some of the other visual accents are a little bit sleeker, things like the LED lighting here, though worth noting, while the brake lights are LED, the turn signal over there is going to be incandescent, and obviously a little bit more squared off. Nothing that bothers me too terribly much, but there is something that does, and that's going to happen here in the lower bumper. As you can see, we have those geometric swatches that mirror what we saw on the front, but on one end we have an exhaust pipe, on the other just what looks like where an exhaust pipe should go. And since no current Forester has dual exhaust, what I'd love to see in this particular powertrain is sort of a hidden exhaust that we see in a lot of other hybrids, so that we could just double up the swatches and have a little more symmetry. And with symmetrical all-wheel drive, I thought Subaru could do just a little bit better. Even though this is the first Subaru not called Crosstrek to get a hybrid powertrain, it does still happen to share the exact same components with what we find over on that Crosstrek. And the heart of that is a 2.5-liter boxer engine. But it's not the exact same as what we find in the non-hybrid model. It has been tweaked and reworked, running on the Atkinson cycle now, to be better paired with this hybrid system. And the hybrid system is not totally unlike what we find in a lot of Toyota models, but it is quite a bit different than we find in the RAV4, which is using a disconnected rear electric motor to create its all-wheel drive system. Subaru is doing everything connected mechanically, and one of the downsides of that is efficiency, but we still get a big bump over the current model, especially when it comes to city. 35 city, 34 highway, 35 overall combined, and we even get a power bump and torque bump. We're now up to 194 horsepower. That's up 14 from the non-hybrid model. As for front seat comfort, after hours behind the wheel, I found myself more comfortable than maybe I thought I would be. There is plenty of adjustability here in this seat, including two-way lumbar support. As far as the steering wheel, it's a manual tilt and adjustment, but it does come out a pretty long ways, so everyone should be able to get themselves pretty comfortable. The other thing that I noticed immediately was how much headroom I have. There are very few vehicles smaller than this, or even this size, where I have as much head clearance as I do in this car. But let's see how it goes when I hop in the back. The thing about this rear seating is that it does have a pretty reclined seating position, but with this seat set for myself, not only do I have legroom, but I do actually have enough headroom. It is a little bit weird, like I said, things are pretty reclined here, but if I slide on over, you might be able to see a little bit better that I'm not really losing much or any headroom to this moonroof because it doesn't come nearly that far back. I also do have a nice fold down center armrest, 2 cup holders, 2 USB charging ports, and ventilation, which unfortunately we don't find in that Crosstrek. As you can see, the hatch opens up nice and wide. So even at 6 feet tall, I've got a couple extra inches of clearance. At no point will I worry about bumping my head, and if I need to tuck away from the rain, good news, the Forester has me covered. But it's also got me covered when it comes to cargo capacity, because this space is not just big enough, but it's also the right dimensions. Everything in here is really square. And in a lot of hybrid models, you might expect to see some intrusion into that cargo area, but we don't find that here. We have the exact same load floor, load level as we find in the non-hybrid model. But things are a little bit different under the surface. When we lift this up, we'll find that on the non-hybrid model, there's a little bit of storage space and there's a spare tire. Under here, we get, I guess, a hair of extra storage space, but no spare tire to be found, which means if you're going a little bit farther off the beaten path, you may want to think a little bit further in advance. We also have the same clever accessory layout that we find in the non-hybrid models, but if you want to take a closer look at that, you can check out our full review where we did a little bit deeper dive into what this rear cargo area looks like. On the interior of these hybrid trims, you'll find things standard that might be optional on the gasoline counterparts. So that means things like our digital gauge cluster are built in as standard. We have the larger display here in the center, but what that does mean is that we are going to lose a little bit of button functionality. For example, things like your climate control, you still have heat up and down, but then we've moved to a touchscreen instead of a physical switch. And if you want to go deeper into that display, you have to click here, and this is what you'll be working with. I don't know if this is going to be a big issue for many, but for some, I think it will come up. And I do have to admit, when we look into some of these controls, this looks maybe a little bit outdated in the software. Good news is that Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wireless are standard across the lineup, and that's what I've been utilizing most of the time. When it comes to buttons and switches, we do still have a few here. Volume and mute and unmute are going to be there. And then we also have our tune, so you can scroll through your radio if you are in fact listening to said radio. Just below that, we'll find some interesting connectivity options. You'll notice a USB-A, USB-C, and one headphone jack. I can't say I see too many of those, but we have one here. And because we do have wireless CarPlay, Android Auto, we also have a Qi wireless charging mat. You can see it's got a little switch over here for on and off. So if you want to leave things there and not worry about what happens to them with that mat integrating with them, you can go ahead and turn that system off. Moving back from here, things stay pretty simple. We have our gear selector, park, reverse, neutral, drive. There is a manual mode, and that's going to partner with the paddle shifters we find on the back of that steering wheel, but not a lot of buttons here either. Your parking brake listed here, and then 12 volt, 120 watt outlet for additional power should you need it. 2 cup holders, and just in this center armrest, a little bit more storage capacity, not enormous, but certainly enough. Around the rest of the interior, things like your color and material are going to be somewhat related to the different trims that you select. We have the limited trim, which means that our material here is a leatherette. So the Softex interior is what they call this. If you want real leather, it is available on the hybrid, but only on that touring trim. Subaru says they suspect that a lot of their folks who are looking for the hybrid are also looking to make a smaller impact in the environment, so they have more natural fibers and synthetics instead of actual leather. Across the dash, that geometric pattern we saw stamped on the front and back is going to be listed throughout here. Just a little bit of extra splash in a dimension that I think does go quite a long way in an interior that's also relatively basic, but I think it goes quite a long way. Here in the driver's seat, you can find where most of your buttons end up. That's going to be here on the steering wheel. Left side, most of your entertainment. On the right side, more of your safety systems and functions like adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, that sort of thing. Tucked behind the wheel there is that digital display cluster. You are able to do a few different things here, a couple different options for what that view looks like. One thing I wasn't able to do, unfortunately, is use my Google Maps from Android Auto, but if you have CarPlay, it will go ahead and display on here. And you can also cycle through a number of different pieces of information that you want there. The digital display is a nice thing to have, especially when you're looking at a higher end trim. Up top, we don't find any trick rear view mirror, but we do find the basics, things like your lighting elements, your SOS button for your connected services, sunglass holder, and if we slide this all the way back, which admittedly is a little bit difficult to do because it's so wide, we have quite a large panoramic moonroof, but it's not one that goes all the way back to over the rear passengers' heads. It's just enough to let a lot of light in to the rest of the cabin. And if we take a quick look back here, we get the same sort of seating material as we find on those front seats, but around back, everything stays fairly similar. Time to get this out on the road and pedal to the metal. This isn't quite as quick as the other model we tested just a few weeks ago. The hybrid feels a little bit peppier when you're up to speed, but getting up to speed, it's moving a little bit more weight. So we tested just under 9 seconds, and that seems well within reason. And again, just depending on the surface, that might have made all the difference. So about a half second slower 0 to 60, but we weren't able to test the braking because that road condition wasn't quite right, and it's a little bit too damp to do so now. What I can tell you is that as this vehicle handles, is really well balanced. We have a little bit more weight out back because that's where we have that battery, but it doesn't feel like it's really hampering the driving dynamics of the hybrid model. It just feels like it's, balanced just a little bit differently. And even though it's heavier, I'd say probably a better weight distribution. The wheels and tires end up being just about the same between the different models. The base wheel is a little bit bigger for the hybrid, but as far as width, things stay pretty much the same. That means when you finally do get out of town and want to tear up the back roads, you'll have a good time doing so, but understanding that this powertrain is the hybrid, not an XT version, so performance still relatively limited. There are a few other tweaks that have been made in ways of suspension and apparently in sound deadening. Sounds like mostly in the floor, but I will say that this engine and the way you'll experience it is going to be a little bit different, because at some points it might be a little bit whinier per se, but at the same time it'll be quieter most of the time when the engine's running less and the hybrid motors are kicking in just a little bit more. I played around a bit with the paddle shifters, but felt like it was just easier to leave things in normal mode. If you want to do something different, good news, it's here and available for you, but probably not something I would play a whole lot with. Now, I mentioned the XT because there's a lot of love for the Turbo Forester of old, but right now the hybrid is the way you get the most power, and it's also the way you get the most efficiency, and that's never really a problem for me. People might not like the way those things interact or might be offended that Subaru chose not to go bigger power, but you have to make a trade-off, and this trade-off I think is one that is really going to meet the customer base where they at. They want more efficiency, but they don't want to lose any of the driving dynamics or experience or sure-footedness that they've come to expect from their Subaru, and that's exactly what you get here. There are more powerful models, but that's not quite been the Subaru ethos, at least not for the last couple years. And there are more efficient models, but those efficient models do tend to sacrifice a little of the all-wheel drive potential. Maybe not the everyday performance, because it's not like this thing right now needs to be all-wheel drive in a 50-50 distribution, but the efficiency that we would gain in that other model means that if things got hairier, it wouldn't feel the same. And that's what a lot of this comes down to, is feel. Yes, you'll feel it in your wallet when you go to the gas station versus some other models, but even versus the other Forester available, it's going to make things a little bit lighter. I mentioned that XT because there's a lot of love for the Turbo Forester of old, but right now if you want the most horsepower, it's the hybrid. And if you want the most efficiency, it's the hybrid. And the best of both worlds isn't a bad thing to me. And if Subaru has to pick one motor, this is probably the right way to go. Not only is it going to feel a little bit peppier as you're driving, but it's going to save you a little bit of money in the long run. And Subaru wasn't willing to go too efficient at the cost of that driving performance and the dynamics that Subaru owners have come to expect. Right now, it's not like I need symmetrical all-wheel drive. I don't need any more than, well, a front or rear-wheel drive vehicle to be totally safe, but if things got hairier, would I be willing to sacrifice the efficiency for the potential for that driving to go smoother or even safer? And for a lot of folks, the answer to that question is no. But they also don't just buy their Forester to get them to and from work, at least not everyone. It's not just on-road we expect performance from the Forester, it's off-road. And so the hybrid has to be able to do all of the above. And one of the biggest things we get from hybrid to non-hybrid is that we keep the same amount of ground clearance, and that's not always the case. There's usually some sort of compromise, and admittedly in this instance, the compromise is going to be in fuel economy, but that's to keep the all-wheel drive capability that we expect from the Forester. So we have the same kind of system that we would expect from the non-hybrid. We also get a little bit more torque, a little bit more horsepower, and that's actually going to make it a little bit easier to crawl around here, and in some instances a little bit quieter. Right now our engine is not running at all because we're in EV mode, because we're going downhill, and I have to admit that does make for a slightly nicer experience. But the other thing we get is 8.7 inches of ground clearance, a slightly retuned suspension, just to make sure that it's managing the weight appropriately. The only real strong suggestion I have is for folks who do plan on doing a little bit more of this than just your everyday grocery runs, is to make sure you check your wheel and tire packages. We are in the limited trim, which means we have the 18-inch wheel, not the 19-inch wheel. And that was something that earlier in the day we were told we were going to do some off-roading, and I specifically hunted for a not 19-inch wheel. As much as they look really good on those touring and those sport models, it's nice to have a little bit of extra cushion. Or you could always have another set if you wanted to, and that way you can swap them out. But I imagine most folks will just pick one, and the last thing you want to do is be out here and end up with a flat tire and not being able to move forward because you just didn't quite have enough sidewall. Folks who do find themselves taking trips off the pavement, or this is maybe how you get to and from your house with an unpaved gravel and or dirt driveway, this is going to be a vehicle that does such a good job of really absorbing all of these impacts. It's a soft rotor, and actually the best thing it does is soften up the road. It makes it so that you're no longer having to deal with any back-braking, jarring actions for things that other vehicles who might be technically more capable are really going to go ahead and translate into the cabin. For me, this is probably going to be enough for most folks out there, and you might be surprised what you can do in a regular all-wheel drive, non-super lifted with the right set of tires. And it's nice that we have an option now that runs with a hybrid powertrain to do pretty much everything you could ask it for. If you want to order your Forester in a hybrid, there is a bit of a premium, but it's not as large of a discrepancy as it might first seem, because the hybrid has everything built in, where the non-hybrids do have different packages available. That comes out to about a $1,400 difference, and to me, that's $1,400 well spent. You also get a pick of which trim you want. Things aren't really limited here. You have premium, sport, limited, and touring, and that means that you can start with your hybrid at $36,415 for that premium trim, going all the way up to touring at $43,115. And if those are the vehicles you want, you can get them right now. They should arrive in showrooms basically as we're filming this video, and as it might come out a few weeks later, they might already be driving around your town. But you won't really notice because they just look like regular Foresters, and I think that's what people are going to appreciate most about this. The only question is, are they hybrid enough? Do you want something that's a little bit more efficient, or is the sure-footedness of the symmetrical all-wheel drive system really the leading force for you? Because this is built different than the others, and the biggest change is going to be in fuel economy for the city, and I suspect that's where most people are going to be driving. As much as we want to get out for the weekend, we have to pay the bills and make sure we can book that vacation. Let me know, is this the direction you would go? Did you get the Forester without the hybrid, or is something like the RAV4 still going to be the efficiency king, and that's where your heart lies? Leave those down in the comment section below. If you want to see the full review of the 2026 Forester, the non-hybrid model, Alex shot that just a few weeks ago. You'll find a link down in the description below. And if you want even more of us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram. We have a brand new podcast, the Auto Buyer Guide podcast, you'll find on YouTube. You'll also be able to listen to on your favorite streaming services. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to duck out of the rain. See you down the road.